The subject of war has long been one of the cornerstones of gaming. We've all at some point either saved the world or ruled it with an iron fist.
And in close to 4 decades, the depiction of war has gone from this to this. That's an amazing evolution.
Well, largely driven by technology, sure, but it is fascinating to see the love affair this medium has had with armed conflict. Let's take a look back at how we got here, starting with the early days of home console gaming.
In 1977, the Atari 2600 launch title, matter-of-factly called Combat, pit one player against another on the same screen. It was all about positioning yourself for victory, taking potshots at each other in tanks, biplanes and jets.
And for its time, this was edge-of-your-seat multiplayer.
It totally was, although I do think the cover on the box oversold the excitement somewhat.
Well, this is an age where the cover art really had to get the imagination going. On the Intellivision console 1 year later was Armor Battle, another war-themed launch title.
And looking at it in action, you can see that this is essentially World of Tanks, but with 8 sprites and 16 colours.
Yeah, but what games like this did was give players the thrill of needing to vanquish, or be the vanquished, which of course is the crux of most war games.
In the very early 80s, Atari was doing some pretty amazing things in the coin-op arcades too. Battlezone was an amazing vector graphics 3D experience, one of the first to put players in first person to hunt and destroy enemy targets. And I remember the cabinet had an actual viewfinder you would look through to make it even more immersive.
The US Army actually got Atari to make a version of the game to use for training their Bradley fighting vehicle gunners, so there was a video game connection to the actual military even back then. While the arcades were raging, the home computer scene of the 80s with the Commodore 64 and the Apple II were delivering more historically accurate strategy games.
Yes, grid and turn-based encounters, which were heavily influenced by what was popular in tabletop gaming. Here in Australia, Strategic Studies Group, commonly known as SSG, were producing games like Battlefront, giving players control over individual units in land battles. Despite how abstract it looks now, it was far from simplistic. You had to take into account different terrain types and juggle all sorts of detailed unit statistics.
This more detached, bird's-eye view of war brought us new gameplay mechanics. The fog of war technique first surfaced in Empire War Game of the Century in 1988, and it's now hard to imagine strategy games without it. And one of the first games to attempt real-time strategy gameplay was The Ancient Art of War by Broderbund, a game that pressured you with unit morale and hunger to add to the depth of its paper, rock, scissors gameplay.
It paved the way for RTS classics like Dune 2 and Command & Conquer. Games which really drove the strategy genre forward with things like base building and resource management. Sure, this was highly fictionalized warfare, but not having to adhere to historical accuracy allowed for more varied units and faster, more intense gameplay.
And over time, the strategy genre has split between games that stay true to a war room-style map-based experience and those that are now about playing with virtual action figures.
Just rewinding the timeline slightly, a game that was a bit of a landmark for war gaming was definitely Carrier Command in 1988. It mixed strategy play with the challenge of controlling the systems of an aircraft carrier in real time. This was straying into the territory of proper simulators, which is a natural offshoot for wargaming. Piloting aircrafts on sorties and operating high-tech submarines. Playing with the hardware of war has its own special appeal, doesn't it?
Well, it's a different kind of challenge too. Learning how these machines actually work and making decisions as pilots or commanders would in the real world can be incredibly demanding. Technology has allowed for a stunning level of realism in these games.
Yeah, and one of the biggest leaps in technology for gaming came in the 90s with the introduction of the CD-ROM. We went from pixels to polygons, and of course that brought us the first-person shooter.
Yes, now this is the genre that has flourished with the advances made in 3D graphics. And of course, once game designers became obsessed with putting a gun in our hands, it only made sense that a flood of first-person military games would follow. Medal of Honor in 1999 for the PlayStation, which was actually an idea put to Electronic Arts by Steven Spielberg, put you on the front line and smack bang in the crosshairs of the enemy's rifle.
Other FPS games like Doom and Half-Life may have rocked the world of game design, but it feels like a World War II setting is what really drove this genre mainstream. There's an immediate understanding of the conflict, good guys versus Nazis for instance, that people can easily connect with.
Which is probably why there were about 10 Medal of Honor games in a 5-year period. It was big business. What shouldn't be overlooked, however, is how multiplayer warfare evolved in the same period. In 2000, Counter-Strike was released, and it was a seminal game laying the groundwork for the team-based multiplayer we find in so many military shooters. Selecting all of your gear before spawning into the map and having to complete map-based objectives aside from just killing the enemy.
Yes, I've heard Counter-Strike referred to as the chess of first-person shooters, and I think that's quite accurate. Operation Flashpoint Cold War Crisis came out 1 year later, and took first-person warfare into a far more realistic open-world setting. Here was a game that was modern and punishingly realistic.
Yeah, it was one of the first to make players approach combat like a real-life encounter. You really had to lay low and pick your battles. Flashpoint's developer Bohemia Interactive has actually been responsible for developing Virtual Battlespace, a full-blown training simulator used by armed forces worldwide, including both the US Army and the Australian Defence Force.
9 o'clock, man, at 100 meters.
Hey, target that man.
And of course, they also went on to create the brutal Armour games.
But on the opposite end of the spectrum, about as far away as you can get from simulation, comes the rock and roll explode slow motion-a-thon that is Activision's Call of Duty. This is a series that takes the cinematic version of war to a whole other level. The white-knuckled beach landing at the start of Call of Duty 2 in particular was a defining moment, because it made you feel like one vulnerable soldier caught in the unbridled chaos of infantry warfare.
After what seemed like a glut of World War II games, developer Infinity Ward revitalized the genre again with Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. An exciting roller coaster of military scenarios that took everyone by surprise at the time. It's been one of the most influential war games in the FPS catalogue for both its single-player campaign and frantic multiplayer game design.
But when it came to sandbox combat, you had to head out to Battlefield. From the original Battlefield 1942 to the recent games, they put us in a war experience full of variables and emergent explosive scenarios. Online, Battlefield now focuses more on squad-based teamwork. A good squad wins matches. What I love so much about this series, Hex, is just how it lets you play with all the toys of war and often lets you crash them into each other.
Hey Goose, look up. Oh man!
FPS games are a big adrenaline kick and have certainly grown to dominate the war genre for that very reason. However, we've recently seen developers move in another direction to make games that scrutinize all the lasting effects of war. It's a compelling subject.
Yes, and to find out more, Goose has gone straight to the source, speaking with a number of developers to find out what makes war such a potent topic.